And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Steve Lafleur. He's a Senior Public Policy Analyst, and he writes for The Hub. Steve, just trying to unpack a little bit about where you see things are at in terms of housing prices and where you see them going. New home buyers. So what's the situation for them now, and what situation do you see for them in the near future?
Well, obviously, a lot of the initial enthusiasm for home buying that happened during the pandemic has died down. Interest rates are going up, so it's possible that'll put a floor on or a ceiling on housing prices for a little bit. I personally am not working with the idea that we're going to have a massive correction in housing. To be clear, I don't think this is going to happen. It's entirely possible that we'll give up some of the gains in housing prices for the last few years, but I think that structurally, the challenge is that we've got tight markets in the biggest housing markets in the country, and unless something dramatically changes, for instance, if all of a sudden people stop moving to Toronto and Vancouver, which doesn't seem very likely, um, we're going to have more buyers than we have houses for a while. So it's hard to see a major change in that without some sort of major economic problem accompanying it.
So still a pretty tight market out there, Steve?
It's possible things will slow down for a bit, but the challenge is that when you think about it, anybody who's a potential buyer or seller rather is also a potential buyer in most cases or renter. So if there's a tight market, they have to find somewhere else to go. And you think about it, if you already own a house, interest rates are going up. Do you want to potentially make a move when you're facing the same situation that other buyers are? Probably not. So there will be a lot of people who just won't end up selling. So it's really hard to see a scenario without some sort of real tail risk where housing materially decreases in the near future.
Let's broaden out a little bit. Where do you see the economy at large and how this intersects with the housing market right now?
Well, um, the reality is that there are tightening financial conditions for a reason. Everybody is concerned about inflation. Central banks are doing what they're supposed to do in that scenario. Um, Nobody's being particularly subtle about it. It's pretty well understood that central banks want a slowdown in the economy, at least in the short term, which is probably healthy. Whether it will go beyond that is something I couldn't say, but um, I guess the challenge is that there are people who are putting two and two together and saying, well, that is going to lead to low housing prices and things would be great for me. And it's hard to make that math work unless you're, in a very specific situation. For instance, if you're somebody who has, a lot of wealth and who's a renter by choice and who might say, okay, I wasn't interested in, bidding for a two-bedroom condo, but maybe now that things have really cooled down, but these are marginal cases. I can't tell you what percentage of the population it is, but it's hard to view it. It's hard to imagine it being large, given that you know over half the population already owns houses, and owners tend to be wealthier than renters. So it's hard to see a scenario where a large percentage of the population can all of a sudden leg into the housing market because houses go down. So
Got it. So, one of the things that's been noted by analysts is that housing plays and investing in housing plays an outsized role in our economy, and that so the ups and downs of housing prices has a huge impact on people's net worth and their ability to, affordability, those kinds of issues. Do you have any comments on that?
it certainly is true. People often talk about Canada as having basically being an economy dependent on oil and gas and housing. And there's something to that. These are both big contributors to the country, and housing in particular in Toronto and Vancouver are major parts of the economy. Uh, the one problem with that, though, is that in some ways it's not big enough in the short term because we do have these structural deficiencies and we do need to do something about it. If we keep building housing at the rate that we're building it currently in Vancouver and Toronto, we're going to be in a lot of trouble because it's
Right.
just not fast enough. The provincial government in Ontario, for instance, had a housing panel that, if I recall correctly, called for doubling the supply of housing over the next 10 years, or the supply or the number of starts over the next 10 years. That's a big change. So in some ways, as much as it might be unhealthy, we almost need to do more in the short term just to catch up.
Got it. Steve Lafleur, we're going to continue with our conversation. We're going to take a short break now. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.